Well, girls, which car should we take on our little road trip? Dad's Chevy Nomad would be practical, but the Chevy Nova's got a bit more flair to her. Of course, if it's flair we're going for, I don't think anything we have can compete with a classic Cadillac, James Darling said as he surveyed his automotive fleet with a sense of satisfied pride. The Darlings had acquired many vehicles over their long and nefarious career, more often than not stolen from their victims and repurposed into future instruments of entrapment and torment. James had kept their favorites running flawlessly over the years, modifying them as necessary with his own mechatronic inventions when conventional parts simply wouldn't do.
That's a bit of a leading question, isn't it, James Darling? You know the Corvette is my favorite, Mary Darling replied. It's the quintessential American sports car. Nothing else we have drives like it. That was the first car you actually bought, and you bought it for me. I still remember the first victim I ran down with it.
Ah, but you only like getting blood on the outside of the Corvette, James countered, as he shoved their bound and gagged victim onto the concrete floor. She was too exhausted to offer any resistance, and her hollow eyes just stared off into the distance, her mind barely registering what was happening anymore. You're extremely meticulous about keeping the inside immaculate, remember, Mary Darling?
True enough, James Darling, but it's not as if I don't have experience in keeping blood from corpses and victims from seeping into the upholstery, Mary argued, prodding the girl with her foot to test whether she was the latter or the former. Plus, a sports car is a flashier status symbol than a caddy. Suppose we ran into Veronica in that silly little purple Porsche she has. Wouldn't it make sense to be in something that can both outshine and outrun her? But Mommy Darling, this is a family road trip, and the Corvette is not a family car, Sarah Darling sang sweetly as she stepped over their victim like she was a piece of luggage, excitedly casting her black eyes over the selection of vehicles on offer. Besides, something about a sports car just screams new money. No, we need something with more seating and a softer spoken elegance. The Bel Air and the Oldsmobile 88 are perfectly charming, and I do like them both, but Daddy Darling's right. This is a special occasion, and only our very best vehicle will do. I think we should take the Cadillac, if for no other reason than it's Daddy Darling's favorite. He is the only one of us who can legally drive after all.
Looks like you're outvoted, Mary Darling, James smiled, while consolingly putting his arm around Mary's waist and leading her over to the winning vehicle. Modern Cadillacs may not stand out much in today's overcrowded luxury market, but a classic like this remains the pinnacle of luxury and refinement. Not to mention, the presidential state car is still a Cadillac. That's gotta count for something.
The Corvette is still the more iconic car, but I'll admit the Cadillac is more practical for our outing today, Mary conceded. But if anyone asks, my car is a Vette. Sarah Darling, I'm riding up front with your father. Of course, Mommy Darling. Children and VIPs should always ride in the back seat, Sarah agreed, as she held up her head in smug self-importance. I guess we'll have to go into the trunk, though. She's liable to attract unwanted attention in this condition, James said, as he slung her over his shoulder and carried her around to the back of the Cadillac. That's fine, Daddy Darling. I'd like to keep a seat free in case we pick up a hitchhiker, Sarah chimed in. I wouldn't get your hopes up, Sarah Darling. Hitchhikers aren't as common as they used to be, Mary cautioned her. Afraid of serial killers, I'd imagine, which is ironic since there aren't as many of us around anymore either.
Damn modern forensics make it nearly impossible for an amateur to get started these days, James lamented, as he tossed the girl into the trunk, followed by a few suitcases which he arranged to keep her concealed. A single mass shooting is the best any of them can usually manage. The plebs living in fear of them is better than nothing, I suppose, but serial killings inspire a more insidious flavor of paranoia. You know who the gunman is the second he fires off his gaudy rifle, but any of your neighbors could be a serial killer and you never know it. After closing and locking the trunk, James opened the back passenger side door for his daughter and the front side passenger for his sister before popping into the driver's seat himself. It's been a while since we made a pilgrimage to the shrine of Moros, he remarked as he turned the ignition key. I can't wait to show the bile how much you've grown, Sarah Darling. The eternally preteen girl smiled at him in the rearview mirror.
Now don't you get lulled into my sweet little girl routine, Daddy darling. I've grown plenty in ways that you can't see, she boasted, her fluid black irises flaring slightly as her power coursed through her physical body.
James turned the dial on the control to his garage door opener, flipping through the preset destinations until he found a location relatively close to the shrine. He had never put a portal anywhere remotely close to it, let alone one by the shrine itself, out of fear of drawing unwanted attention to it. This one appears to be in good working order. We should be able to make a reasonable enough time leaving from here, he said, as the door clanked open, revealing a rainy November day on the outside of their playroom.
Why can't the outside world ever be nice for once? We're on a family trip,
Mary complained, as she drew out her flask and took a swig. It's just a little rain, Mary darling. We've been through far worse, James consoled her, as he preemptively turned the wipers on.
I like the rain. It's a necessity of life that people often fail to appreciate, and one that will occasionally escalate into a natural disaster. Isn't it wonderful how even the most essential pillars of life can turn against it, wreaking death and devastation for no reason at all?
Sarah commented. It truly is, Sarah darling, it truly is, her father agreed as he slowly turned the Cadillac towards the open door. Once more into the breach. To Mary's chagrin and Sarah's delight, the rain did not let up. Sarah was legitimately more thoughtful than her mother, and found a stark and somber beauty in the world under a gray November sky. The leaves were gone, the flowers were gone, and the snow had yet to come. But such a seemingly bleak vista was not without its charm. The world felt silent, still, liminal. Not a deprivation, but a respite from its seasonal happenings. Everything beautiful about winter, spring, summer, and fall would come again. And their absence was not always a bad thing. Nothing good could last forever, because too much of anything ceased to be good. Fleeting things must be appreciated while they last, and so too must the fleeting rest between them. Sarah refrained from speaking these thoughts aloud, as they weren't sufficiently morbid. As they drove down increasingly lonely highways, the sky grew darker and the rainfall more intense. Massive puddles formed within eroded potholes, sending up great splashes of dirty water as they drove through them. Aren't you glad we didn't take the Corvette now, Mary darling? Roads like these are no place for a low-riding sports car. The hell, I'm beginning to regret not taking Uncle Larry's surplus army jeep. And then again, with the size of these puddles, the Amphicar might have been more appropriate.
The condition of this highway is an absolute indictment of the public road system, Mary insisted. A classic tragedy of the commons. I would never let the roads in our playroom get anywhere near this bad unless it was for a hunt. Are these parasites really so adverse to privatized services that they prefer this to the occasional toll booth? I think the bumpy roads are kind of fun, Mummy darling, Sarah said, bouncing slightly as they drove over another pothole. Plus, bad weather and bad roads make it more likely we'll see an accident.
I don't want you to get your hopes up, Sarah darling, but I think I see somebody walking along the shoulder up ahead of us, James said as he squinted ahead.
Really?
Sarah squealed as she shot forward. Dead ahead of them was a man in a dark green raincoat with a matching duffel bag slung across his back, stalwartly trudging through the onslaught of pelting rain.
In this weather, he must be a drifter. Easy prey. He's not hitchhiking, though, so he's a stubborn bastard at least. That could make him fun prey. Can we pick him up, Daddy darling? Oh, please, oh, please, oh, please.
We can offer him a ride, Sarah darling, but if he doesn't take it, I'm afraid we can't go chasing after him. We don't want to be late to the shrine now, do we? As they drove past the man, James pulled over to the side of the road in front of him. Sarah immediately sprung into action, popping her door open and sticking her head out into the pouring rain.
Hey there, mister, want a ride?
She asked, loudly enough to be heard over the weather, but still managing to come across as sweet and cheerful. The man hesitated for only an instant before breaking into a jog and hopping into the Cadillac as quickly as he could. Thank you so much. If you could just take me as far as the next truck stop, I won't be any more trouble than that. he said as he pulled down his hood and shook the rain out of his hair. Oh, it's no trouble, James assured him as he pulled back onto the highway. You trying to make your way to Toronto or thereabouts? Thereabouts, yeah. Only place in this province that's not a rural backwater, right? The man replied as he reflexively reached for a seatbelt, only to realize there weren't any. Oh, it's practically New York with poutine, James laughed. I'm sure you can find poutine in New York, James darling, Mary said. Not that we'd ever go looking for it, of course. Our family prefers homemade food due to our unique culinary traditions. You weren't really trying to walk all the way to Toronto, were you, Ducky? If I had to. I figured that I could hoof it there in a few days, but I guess the weather had other plans, the man said as he looked around the cabin in confusion. Are there seatbelts in this thing, man? Of course not. This is a '57 Cadillac, son. It was made in Detroit during the city's golden years. You can't tarnish a gem like this with modern safety fetishes. Is that even legal, man? Especially with a kid? School buses don't have seatbelts, and they're normally full of nothing but children, so they can't really be that important now, can they? Mary argued. And even if they are, we don't really believe in seatbelts, and people today are too risk-averse. Great men should confront danger, and weak men should be cold by it. And keeping the weak alive and the great restrained makes us all worse off in the long run, Sarah added. Uh-huh. Hey, are you too sure you're comfortable with me sitting back here with your sister? The man asked, nervously appraising her strange eyes. Because I totally understand if you don't. Oh, don't worry, Sarah Darling doesn't bite. That's what Mary Darling's here for. I'm James, by the way. What's your name, traveler? Call me Garland, the man replied. So then, Garland, mind if I ask what circumstances possess you to head to Toronto on foot? It can't be hard to scrounge up the money for bus fare, can it? It was a kinda spur-of-the-moment sort of thing, you know. I just needed to be on my way, so I decided to pack a bag, pick a direction, and see how far I got. Adventurous, I like that, James nodded approvingly, hoping that a change of scenery would bring a change of fortunes as well, I take it. Something like that, yeah, Garland replied, gazing out the rain-streaked windows at the tall rows of pines swaying in the howling wind. What do you think it's like to be a tree standing tall and proud for centuries, only to be snapped in half by a wayward gust of wind in a bad storm? Sarah asked. And to be so seemingly invulnerable for so long, only to be struck down by the chance movements of forces far outside your control and comprehension? I don't think trees think about that kind of thing. And a girl your age probably shouldn't be either. Oh, our little Sarah Darling has always had a keen interest in philosophy. For instance, Sarah Darling, what do you make of our guest here accepting our invitation? He was free when he was outside, but freedom was terrible, so he forfeited it for a modicum of comfort, scarcely even weighing the risk of putting himself at our mercy. And, of course, one of the fundamental tenets of Western philosophy is that he who sacrifices freedom for safety deserves neither, hence the lack of seatbelts. You're homeschooled, ain't you, kid? Oh, it's that obvious, isn't it? The public schools are as bad as the roads, and never produce enough children anywhere near as erudite as our little Sarah. Mary beamed as she took a cigarette and lit it with her Zippo lighter, quickly filling the sealed car with smoke. And even the best of private schools wouldn't have been able to give our progeny the specialized education that she requires. I shudder to think what would have happened to James and I if our Uncle Larry hadn't stepped in to fill the academic gaps in our upbringing. Oh, I'm sorry. Where are my manners? And can I offer you a smoke, Ducky? I'm good, thanks. You know, I may not be sure about the seatbelts, but it's definitely illegal to smoke with kids in the car, he said awkwardly. That's absurd. Do you expect me to put my sweet little girl outside in this weather? How is pouring rain better than a few puffs of smoke? Honestly, people just don't think things through these days. Daddy darling, even though I know the answer, my daughterly duties oblige me to ask at least once. Are we there yet? Our turn is just up here, Sarah Darling, James replied as he hit his turn signal. Garland didn't see a road up ahead,
just a gap between two trees barely wide enough for a car to pass through. The one on the left had an old rusty sign nailed to it that read, "Private property, no trespassing." And the one on the right had a sign that said, "Dead end, keep out." "All these years and no one's taken down those signs," James remarked as he veered to the left. "This road really has seen better days." As he passed between the trees, Garland was struck with an inexplicable shudder that shook him so off guard that he didn't immediately notice that the rain had come to a sudden stop. Despite this, the sky became darker and the tall skeletal trees little more than silhouettes in the gloom. Though he was quite certain there had been no road at all before, an overgrown dirt path meandered through the forest before them. Where are we?" he asked as he leaned forward, trying to see as much as he could. "Didn't you see the sign? It's private property. So private that only a few privileged can notice it or remember that it exists. Hallowed, I think is the term," James said. "I'm not sure there are many people who would describe this place as hallowed, James darling," Mary said. "Our Uncle Larry first brought James and I here when we were just kids, and it was quite the macabre spectacle back then. It's good to know that some things never change." As Garland's eyes adjusted to the low light, he saw that the upper branches of the trees were all impaled with blackened human bodies. Though most had no doubt been there for many years, all were encircled by fresh swarms of buzzing and bloated flies. What the hell? Garland stammered, as he threw himself back against the seat, his eyes flicking back and forth between the obvious horrors outside the car and the insidious ones within. "I agree, it lacks subtlety. Our own playroom wasn't much better when we first came across it. Thank goodness for Mary Darling's remarkable homemaking skills. She really turned it into a proper home for us." "Oh, you're too kind, James darling. Unfortunately, my gifts are rather limited outside of our domestic sphere, so there's not much I can do about this place. Sarah darling, on the other hand, should be quite attuned with the bile here. Any changes you'd like to make to the decor, sweetie?" "It is awfully quiet, isn't it?" Sarah asked rhetorically, her fluid black irises pulsating as all the impaled bodies were simultaneously brought back to life. A cacophony of tortured screams rose through the woods, boughs breaking as the flailing revenants spasmed in terrified agony. "That's better," Sarah sighed with a contented smile. "Corpses aren't really scary. They can almost be serene, like a rotting log. It's just part of nature. But living, mutilated victims kept in protracted torture against the very laws of nature? That's sublime, don't you agree, Mr. Garland?" Garland desperately looked out the rear window to make sure the path out of the cursed woods was still visible. Leaving his duffel bag behind, he threw open the door and jumped out of the car, breaking into a mad run as soon as his feet hit the ground. He didn't get very far before a tree branch broke in front of him, sending one of the screaming revenants crashing to the ground and blocking his path. He skidded to a stop, watching as it wildly thrashed about, trying to right itself. He heard other branches snapping and realized he would soon be outnumbered by the wretched abominations. He spun around to see if the darlings were pursuing him, only to see the Cadillac waiting patiently on the trail with its side door still open, and Sarah's smiling head poking out of it. "Freedom or safety, mister? What's it gonna be?" she asked, before retreating back inside. The screams around him grew more ferocious, more vengeful, and he could now hear them clumsily clashing through the underbrush towards him. He ran for the Cadillac as fast as he could, diving into the back seat and slamming the door behind him. "You chose wrong. Again," Sarah said flatly, as she sat straight with her hands neatly folded in her lap. "But you are safe. I'd never let those plotting cretins vandalize my darling daddy's darling caddy." How the hell are you controlling those things? What the hell are you?" Garland demanded. Sarah smiled widely as her black eyes subtly shifted in his direction. "It's like you said, Mr. Garland. I'm homeschooled," she replied in a sinisterly lilting voice. "It's amazing what a bright young mind can learn when her home is a microcosmic basement universe between dimensions, isn't it?"
Garland's fear quickly morphed into frustration and anger, giving no credence to her words but instead trying to contrive some method of escape. Or, failing that, revenge.
Uh-oh. You're thinking of taking me hostage, aren't you, Mr. Garland? So ungrateful. If it wasn't for me, you'd still be walking out there in the rain. All I did was offer you a choice, Mr. Garland, and you made one. You have no one to blame for this but yourself.
You know, son, impotent or not, I don't much care for it when someone threatens either of my two favorite girls. I'm sure you can understand, James said coldly, glancing up at him in the rearview mirror. I didn't say anything, Garland muttered, placing his hands in his pocket and withdrawing as far away from Sarah as he could.
You were thinking about putting me in a chokehold and demanding that Daddy Darling turn the car around, Sarah insisted. You thought you could break my neck fast enough to keep my parents from attacking you while I was in your grasp. You wanted to see me crying, to wipe the smug grin off my face. Is it all it takes to make you want to hurt a little girl, Mr. Garland? I think I'd like to see you crying, Mr. Garland, and my happiness is much more important than yours. Daddy Darling, floor it.
At her insistence, her father slammed on the gas and the Cadillac went speeding down the forested dirt road with so much force that Garland was pinned against his seat. Above the roar of the engine, he could hear the ravenous howling of the Revenants as they crashed through the forest, pursuing the vehicle without any sense of self-preservation. "What the hell is going on now?" Garland demanded, as he craned his neck to see the horde galloping after them on all fours like wild animals.
I infused them with our addiction for human flesh, and nothing else, so now all they can feel is an all-consuming hunger that can't be ignored until it's sated, Sarah explained, never dropping her cheery tone or smiling face. And that's how they behave? And to think, James Darling, you once said that I can't resist temptation, Mary commented. I'm not reduced to such savagery at the mere prospect of fresh meat. The hunt has to be well underway before I descend into such heavenly primal madness.
Well, in their defense, Mary darling, they are quite starved, whereas you made us all steak and eggs for breakfast this morning, James said as he deftly wove around the trees, a skill that not all the Revenants had mastered quite as well. They're gonna eat us. You're crazy, kid. You're all fucking crazy.
Oh, calm down. They're completely under Sarah's control. And she was telling the truth about not wanting to hurt the caddy. She's too much of a daddy's girl for such senseless vandalism. But, Mommy Darling, suppose that Daddy Darling made such a sharp turn that Mr. Garland was thrown against the door with so much force that he knocked it open and went flying out of the vehicle, Sarah suggested. Then the Revenants could eat him without ever laying a finger on Daddy's Cadillac. Seemingly by Sarah's command, and perhaps her mere desire, a sharp bend appeared in the road ahead of them, and James didn't slow down in the slightest as he veered around it. As Sarah had predicted, or ordained, the force was enough to slam Garland against the door on his side, knocking it open, and sending him tumbling to the forest floor. The Revenants were on him within seconds, and Garland punched and kicked wildly without even aiming for any specific target. Each of his limbs was almost immediately immobilized by firm Revenant hands, and he braced himself for the agony of their fingers ripping him apart, and their teeth digging into him with wild abandon. But that didn't happen. They were at the whim of their young mistress, and it seemed her whim had changed yet again. Instead, the horde began to chase after the Cadillac, holding Garland overhead and making sure he had no chance to escape. They didn't stop or even slow down until they reached an ancient glade nestled deep in the heart of the dying woods. In the center of the glade was a large well of crumbling black stones, measuring 13 feet across with a staircase of 7 uneven steps leading up to the rim. The Darlings had already parked and gotten out of their car, and Garland watched in horror as James took their earlier victim out of their trunk. Don't feel bad, Mr. Garland. You couldn't have helped her. How could you? You couldn't even help yourself.
The Revenants tossed Garland to the ground at Sarah's feet before instantly scattering back into the surrounding woods. He looked up in horror at the placid and serene face of the young girl, not daring to try to flee or fight back.
That's better,
Sarah commented, flashing him a satisfied smile.
It was my idea to pick you up, Mr. Garland, which means I get to decide what we do with you. Feeding you to the Revenants would have been a waste, but other than that, I'm still mulling over my options. Dead or alive, You'd probably be more risk than you're worth to take back to the playroom, but I'll give you the chance to change my mind about that. Stay right where you are, and be quiet while my parents and I conduct our business here, and I'll see to you when we're finished."
She turned away from him in disinterest, making no attempt to secure him, and took her place by her father's side.
"How's our sacrifice, Daddy darling?"
"When we didn't get so much of a thump out of her, I worried she might not have survived the journey, but it seems she's merely dead on the inside," James replied, as he hefted the catatonic woman up and down. "No use to any of us as a plaything now, and not enough meat on her bones to fret about losing. She'll make a fine revenant to the bile." Sarah grabbed the woman's cheeks with her right hand and forced her to make eye contact with her, probing deep into the darkest recesses of her mind.
"We broke her so badly that only the bile can fix her now. Since her life is no longer of any value to either of us or herself, it is only proper that we surrender her to the one entity who can extract any further utility from her."
With purposeful strides, she ascended the short staircase to the edge of the well, with her parents following closely behind. The well was too deep and too dark to see the bottom of it, but that didn't matter. They knew what was down there, and it saw them easily enough. A chorus of hoarse whispers began echoing up its shaft, chanting in a dead tongue in anticipation of the sacrifice. Sarah gazed down deep into the darkness below, the black bile in her eyes expanding beyond her irises and consuming them entirely.
"Moros, the All-Destroyer, god of doom, death, and suffering, scion of primordial night and primeval dark, kin to reapers, Valkyries, and the fates themselves. Greater are you than the Olympians, the Titans, and all others who would seek the mantle of omnipotence," Sarah said. "While hope lay trapped within Pandora's box, doom spread to rot the world from within. While Moloch and his progeny gnaw at the roots of the world tree from below, and ravenous Yaldabaoth devours it from above, your incarnate bile seeps in from all sides through whatever cracks in the firmament there may be. We have come here today because we are once again in need of your largesse, great Morose. Those who walked in the footsteps of the world serpent have forsaken us, pledging themselves to Emrys, avatar of the darkness beyond the veil. He seeks to destroy us, and even now shards of a miasmic blade still lie within my father's heart from a failed assault by his acolyte. Though Emrys seeks only the demise of our family, he has aligned himself with the god-slaying Zarathustrans, and they shall not be satisfied until they have fattened themselves upon your dark ichor, mighty Morose."
A great unsatisfied rumbling reverberated from deep within the well, along with a pluming vortex of foul wind, and it was a relief to the darlings that their patron deity recognized that it had a stake in their conflict.
"The wilting Empress has been unleashed. The effulgent one walks where it will between the planes, and witches again make covens with chthonic deities. A battle of great titans and their followers is nigh at hand, Morose, and we have come to assure you that in this greatest of iconoclasms, we are yours to command. We offer you this sacrifice to reaffirm our covenant, and in exchange, we ask that you purge my father of his miasmic taint, so that he may fight for us and you with all his strength. May all come to rot and ruin, corroded beneath the black bile of Morose."
Sarah bowed her head and took a step back, making way for her father to approach the edge of the well. With a solid heave, James tossed the nearly dead woman into the well. She plummeted through the dark for several seconds, before landing into the bile with a sickening, squelching splat. The horror that overtook her as a black bile oozed into her body and began remaking her in its own image was finally enough to make her scream again. "Don't know what she's so upset about. She was pretty much a zombie already," James mocked. His body suddenly went taut, and he could feel the miasmic shards in his chest being nudged loose with the utmost precision, the bile in his veins guiding them with only the lightest of touches and short bursts to minimize the damage to his surrounding tissue. When each individual shard was oriented correctly, they silently and swiftly shot out of his chest and into the spiraling vortex to be swept down into the well. Though James cried out in pain as he clutched his chest and dropped to his knees, it faded quickly as the exit wounds healed at a superhuman rate.
"Daddy! James, darling, are you all right?"
Mary asked, as she and Sarah knelt down to aid him. Yes, it's gone. It's completely gone," Emrys won't have that hanging over our heads any longer." They hugged and cheered in triumph, none of them noticing that Garland had been slowly creeping up behind them while they had been focused on their dark ritual. It seemed to him that they had forgotten about him entirely, and now he was only a few meters behind them. His plan had been to only push the girl into the well, but with all of them so close together, he decided to go for them all. As silently as he could, he pounced forwards with as much momentum as he could muster. His attack was met with a sharp wailing sound ascending up the well, and only an instant before he made contact with the darlings, he was impaled through the forehead by a strange dagger. It hit him with so much force he went tumbling backwards, and he was dead before he hit the ground. The darlings, though completely unperturbed by the attempt on their lives, gathered around the corpse to study the instrument of its demise.
"Is that?"
Mary trailed off, reticent to even say it out loud. Sarah tentatively grabbed the hilt of the dagger and slowly drew it out, revealing that its serpentine blade had been cobbled together by the miasmic fragments Rose had pulled from James's heart. The shards were held together by vitrified and gilded bile, the same substance as the hilt, now inert and incapable of reacting with either the miasma or the flesh of Sarah's hand.
"It's beautiful,"
Sarah said, her black eyes wide in wonder.
"Here, Mommy darling, you should have it. You're the best with knives of all of us, and it came from Daddy darling's heart, so it's rightfully yours anyway." "Why, thank you, Sarah darling,"
Mary said, as she graciously accepted the gift, studying it intently. The longer she held it, the wider and more wicked her smile grew, until at last she could hold in her dark revelation no longer.
"This is the knife that I'm going to kill Emrys with."